right, how is everyone doing today? No guests on today's show, but I do want to talk about a method of training that sometimes gets overlooked in our programming, and that is isometric training. Now, if you are working with a certified trainer, I would say this should be incorporated into your training program. If it's not, definitely ask about it. Ask your trainer to, kind of incorporate this into your training program. If you are a trainer listening, hopefully this uh, information is included in your programming for your clients. But if you are in neither category, uh, just kind of doing your own thing, being disciplined, and getting in your workouts or at least some type of movement every day. My goal today is to give you some insight into what isometric training is and some of its benefits. Now, we are all, or I should say most of us are familiar with concentric and eccentric training and what those movements look like, but what is isometric training? Now, if we look at the NSCA's Essentials of Strength Training and Conditioning, 4th edition, which was edited by Dr. Greg Hoff and Dr. Travis Triplett, isometric training is defined as a muscle action in which the muscle length does not change. In eccentric actions, the muscle lengthens, and in concentric actions, the muscle shortens. But in isometric actions, the muscle length doesn't change because the contractile force is equal to the resistive force. For example, in a sit-up, assuming the trunk is straight during the exercise, the abdominal muscles act isometrically to maintain the rigidity of the trunk. It's actually the hip flexors that carry out the actual sit-up movement. Another example that is used frequently, I would say, is a biceps curl. Think about what the muscle looks like and feels like when you're curling that dumbbell up in that concentric phase, and the difference in the eccentric phase of lowering it back down toward the floor. An isometric muscle action in this case would be to hold the dumbbell, say, at about, about 90 degrees of elbow flexion. The muscle is working but not moving concentrically or eccentrically. Now, we'll talk about more examples later on, but we talk in sports about the importance of creating stiffness. Sometimes that is to, brace for some type of impact or change coming on and to be more explosive in certain situations. Dr. Stuart McGill, who has a new 4th edition of his book, Low Back Disorders, Evidence-Based Prevention and Rehabilitation, due to be released in October 2025, published a study in 2015 with Lee titled Effect of Long-Term Isometric Training on Core and Torso Stiffness. Now, the study looked into whether long-term changes in stiffness can be trained, and if so, what is the most effective method? The reason they wanted to look into this is because of 3 performance-enhancing factors. 1, stiffening the torso proximal to the shoulders and hips will transfer full force and movement of muscles to the distal side of the joints, resulting in greater limb strength and speed. The second was by muscularly stiffening the spinal column. They believed that the spinal column's load-bearing capacity would be enhanced. And finally, the athletes would be more resilient in contact sports. That's the injury prevention or reduction factor. Now, what they found was that after 6 weeks of isometric training, significant increases in stiffness were measured, and isometric training was superior in enhancing torso stiffness compared to dynamic training. Now, again, they determined that enhanced core stiffness allows the spine to bear greater loads, leading to greater athleticism. In terms of isometric training, if we're talking about tendon stiffness, research shows that athletes who trained 4 times per week for 12 weeks using isometric training methods resulted in a greater tendon stiffness when using long duration contractions compared to short duration contractions. A more recent study published in 2023 in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research by Tim Sukamel and colleagues compared the effects of including isometric strength training for 24 consecutive weeks against periodic training. By the way, Dr. Sukamel just released his book, Science and Development of Muscular Strength. I was fortunate to do an interview with him while at the 2025 NSCA National Conference You can find that interview on Human Kinetics YouTube channel, as well as our podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, and the Human Kinetics website. It was a really interesting conversation about what strength means and training for different types of strength. Now, in this study, he looked specifically into isometric strength. 24 athletes were randomly assigned to a consecutive isometric strength training group or a periodic isometric strength training group. The athletes completed a 20-meter sprint, a counter movement jump, and an isometric mid-thigh pull during the pretest. All groups did a similar strength training program twice per week, but in the consecutive group, 2 sets of squats were replaced with isometric squats for all 24 weeks, while the periodic group only did the isometric squats on weeks 1 through 6 and 13 through 18. Now, by the end of the study, the group that trained isometric strength for 24 consecutive weeks saw more improvement in their 5-meter sprint time compared to the control group, and both saw improvements in their 10-meter sprint time. Overall, the results showed that the inclusion of isometric strength training resulted in greater improvements in sprint performance than the control group, but no significant difference in all measured variables with a periodic inclusion group. A third study, the most recent that I found, published in 2025 in the International Journal of Sports Physiology and Performance, was performed to determine the effects of stabilization exercises on athletic performance and injury risk in volleyball players. In this study, 23 college volleyball players aged 18 to 25 were assigned randomly to a control group, which had them continue their regular training program. And there was an intervention group which did additional volleyball-specific stabilization exercises twice per week for 8 weeks. The tests used were functional movement screens, sit and reach flexibility tests, a weight-bearing lunge, medicine ball throw, a closed kinetic chain upper extremity stability test, a 20-meter sprint test, a serve skill test, a vertical jump, and an upper extremity dynamic Y balance test. There was a lot going on in that one. Now, the intervention group showed significantly greater improvements in all areas, with the biggest effects being seen in the FMS. Smaller effects, but still important, were noted in the medicine ball throw and vertical jump tests. The impact of the study demonstrated that stabilization exercises can positively impact jump performance, and that core muscles play a fundamental role in balance and postural control, enabling athletes to prepare for more dynamic and explosive actions. It's not just volleyball athletes, though. An interesting study was done on isometric training to improve serve velocity in young tennis players. This one was conducted in Spain, where they used 16 male tennis players from the same tennis academy. They were all very similar in skill level, and as a pretest, they were tested for serve velocity and serve accuracy. They also did 2 upper body limb tests for shoulder internal rotation and shoulder flexion. Each participant then performed 3 maximal velocity isometric contractions in the tested positions that we talked about for 5 seconds each. Now, during a 6-week training intervention, training load was progressively increased in the exercises that targeted those same shoulder, internal rotation and shoulder flexion that they were tested on. What they found was, at the end of the 6 weeks, the tennis players saw significant increases in the ability to produce force in a short amount of time. Now, this helped them increase their serve velocity and had no impact on their serve accuracy. This doesn't mean that an athlete should only train isometrically, but the results of these studies showed the importance of including it, and that they aren't just throw-in exercises to fill a program. I mentioned Tim Sukumel and his book, Science and Development of Muscular Strength, and in it, he describes isometric muscle actions as having no demonstrable changes in muscle fiber length, as I explained at the beginning, and he went on to say that though it is brief, isometric actions occur between the eccentric and concentric actions as part of the stretch shortening cycle. He also explained that an athlete's isometric strength will be greater than their concentric strength, but less than their eccentric strength. So it's important to train all 3 consistently. Now, there are various types of isometric training, and they're explained very well in the Complete Guide to Strength Training Methods. The book points out that the only sport that requires 100% isometric contractions is bodybuilding, and that reason is because of posing. Now, it suggests that for true isometric exercises, you should choose 1 to 4 bodybuilding poses and hold them for 10 to 60 seconds each. Now, if you do that for 8 to 12 reps, you can carve out a good 30 to 40-minute isometric workout strictly on isometric holds. The second type of isometric exercise is a maximum duration isometric. Now, this type involves repeated efforts of 2 kinds of isometry, overcoming isometry and yielding isometry. Overcoming involves a push or pull against the stationary resistance. Now, I have some of my athletes do like a mid-thigh pull, or sometimes moving the safeties of the squat rack up so high that the concentric phase of the squat, during that concentric phase of the squat, they're pressing the bar against the safeties to create force. These types of exercises can be held for 20 to 80 seconds. Now, maximum intensity isometrics will use the same principles of max duration, but with shorter maximum intensity efforts. So rather than holding for 20 to 80 seconds, you can give them more effort in the form of intensity and hold those for 3 to 8 seconds. An example of ballistic isometrics would be similar to the example I gave, raising the squat rack safeties to prevent you from, completing that concentric phase of a squat. But in this method, you'll slightly vary the position and hold for 10 to 40 seconds per position. Now, you can also do this with a bench press, a barbell curl, a seated shoulder press, a bent over row. So you have some options on this one. You can also do pseudo isometrics. This is where you can hold an isometric contraction for as long as possible and get a partner to, kind of manipulate the bar or the implement that you're using. An example of this might be doing a payloft press with a band, and while you're holding that band out for that payloft press, a partner might hit the band or move it to make it less stable, and this is going to force you to work your core quite a bit harder to train to maintain that position. Now, another type of isometric is a quasi-isometric, eccentric. Now, this is where you will actually perform eccentric reps, but you'll do it really slowly, and it ends up being so slow that the reps seem isometric. Now, the book suggests to hold these for 1 to 4 minutes per set. You can get creative with exercises based on these examples, like say you're doing a traditional plank, but you can change positions. That payloft press that I mentioned, for that you can do a number of variations off of that. I like to progress athletes from doing a half kneeling hold to a press out. You can lift the knee off the floor, so in that case you're working the stabilizing muscles of the core, but now you can include the quads. Similar to that might be a split squat hold, where you grab a pair of dumbbells and hold the split squat for a given amount of time, or a static hold, simply holding a pair of weights in your hands, standing tall and making sure that you have great posture. This is like a standing farmer's walk. This will work grip strength, but also involve the shoulders and the core. Don't discount the idea of using isometric exercises as progressions or maybe even regressions. I've had clients before that are unable to do a push-up, so we simply do a push-up hold, which is essentially a plank. This lets them build core and upper body strength in that static position and get more comfortable in that position before they add movement. You could do the same with pull-ups or chin-ups. Those are so tough for most people. So if you want to get better at chin-ups, start with a hold or a hang. You're going to get set up for that chin-up and literally just hang from the bar. Now, to a lot of people, it looks like you're just kind of hanging around and it might look easy, but you're actually building strength through that hold in a way that's going to eventually make that chin-up easier. What about a glute bridge? I've had athletes that have come in with maybe a lower back injury and can't deadlift. but they are typically still able to do a glute bridge. Now, this is another isometric exercise that's going to work the core, the glutes, the hamstrings, without the risk of stressing the back that might come, if something is off with their deadlift or they're experiencing some type of pain. The point is here, there are a number of directions that you could take this, but the important factor is to remember that you should include some type of isometric training in your program to help gain strength. By working stabilizing muscles through isometrics, you are improving your posture, protecting your spine, improving joint stability, reducing injury, and improving your functional movement patterns necessary for normal activities of daily living. When you are including these exercises or learning on your own about the benefits of isometric training, don't forget those resources I mentioned earlier. NSCA's Essentials of Strength Training and Conditioning, 4th edition, Low Back Disorders by Dr. Stuart McGill, Science and Development of Muscular Strength by Tim Sukamel, and The Complete Guide to Strength Training Methods. There are so many more resources that you can look into, including the Human Kinetics journals, which is where I found some of the research articles I referenced today. And don't forget to follow us on our social media channels, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and X. Thanks again for joining me today. I hope you learned a little bit to take with you. As always, send suggestions on topics you want to learn more about, and I will bring that information to you. So until next time, stay well.